Like, those are probably the top two free agents still out there, right? So that's not – if they lose Carson Wentz while they're waiting around for Aaron Rodgers, that's not going to make or break their season. So I think they go to whatever the veteran option is that's out there, and if they don't think any of them are better than Mason Rudolph, who they already brought back, then they don't have to do it. But I do think the Steelers will address that position in the draft, and they'll try to do it fairly early because they know they have to get this figured out for the long term. Even if they sign Aaron Rodgers, he's 41 years old. He's not the long-term solution for them or anybody else. So I think the Steelers probably look at a quarterback in the draft relatively early on.
I thought it was eyebrow-raising what the general manager from the Minnesota Vikings said in terms of not taking Aaron Rodgers off the board with signing with the Vikings at some point later on this offseason. What are people in NFL circles saying about the possibility still looming out there that Rodgers could join the Vikings at some point this offseason?
Yeah, I don't think anybody ever thought it was likely, and I still would say people don't think it's likely. I mean, look, having dealt with general managers in various sports for the last quarter century, like, if you ask them a question that is basically rooted in would you ever consider this, the answer is always going to be yes, because they just don't rule things out. And I think that's what Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah was saying at his press conference the other day. The Vikings, when they lost Daniel Jones to the Colts, right, because they want to have some veteran in there in case J.J. McCarthy needs more time, coming off injury, whatever. They looked around at every option, and Aaron Rodgers is still out there. So they talked about it. They decided not to do it. Could they revisit it if J.J. McCarthy gets hurt in the spring? You know what I mean? And Rodgers is still out there? Sure. But that's not where their head is right now. Their intention is to have J.J. McCarthy be their starting quarterback, and they believe he can do it.
Dan, let's talk about the New York Giants. They add Russell Wilson to that quarterback room that already included Tommy DeVito and Jameis Winston. Do you think adding Russ as the quarterback of the Giants takes them off the board for drafting a quarterback, or could you see a scenario where they still go that route and potentially get Shedeur Sanders?
I could still see a scenario where the Giants draft a quarterback early. But remember, with the Giants, early doesn't have to mean the third pick. They have the second pick of the second round. You could trade back into the end of the first round if somebody you like is there and you want to make the move for that. So if you're the Giants and you don't see a big difference between Shedeur Sanders and Tyler Shuck or whoever, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, then you could take Travis Hunter at 3 and then still get one of those guys with your next pick or maybe a trade back up. So the Giants, much like the Steelers, know that they have to figure out the long-term solution at that position, and Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson are not going to be that at this point in their careers. So I think much like Pittsburgh, much like Cleveland, you have a team that is trying to address the position for the short – well, maybe not Cleveland – trying to address the position for the short term, but also thinking, knowing they have to get it locked up for the long term, and I think they'll look to do that relatively early. This Shedeur Sanders is an interesting case, right, because he could go as high as 2 or 3 if the Browns or the Giants fall in love with him. But if they don't, I don't think they're going to force the pick. And I think that means, maybe Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter become picks 2 and 3, and then Shedeur becomes a guy that, is looking in the New Orleans Saints, Pittsburgh Steelers, New York Jets kind of range.
We're talking with Dan Graziano, ESPN NFL insider here and on Sportsmanlike, presented by Progressive Insurance. Dan, do you think that right now Dion and Shedeur know what team Shedeur is going to be on next year?
Unless it's the Titans, how could they? like there's no way, right? I mean, there's no, no. The answer is no. I don't think they do. I guess if Cleveland was going to take him, they might know that, but I don't get the sense that that's at all decided or set in stone. So no, I think what Dion said the other day about any of the quarterback needy teams that Shedeur has talked to, he'd be happy with him going there, and he listed New Orleans and the Raiders and all these. I think that's all out there. I'm not sure. Everybody started to believe that Cam Ward's going to go 1 to the Titans. Maybe that's true, and maybe that's the most likely outcome. But other than that, I just don't know if anything's settled yet.
Graz, today is Jackson Dart's pro day, and at this time of year, we always hear about these fast risers, guys that are moving up the draft board. What is the ceiling for Jackson Dart? What are you hearing in terms of how high he could actually be drafted?
I think, people were impressed with his performance at the Combine. people were impressed that he gave one, because not everybody does anymore. So I think that goes a long way with teams, the willingness to compete and show off at the combine. If you start looking at that middle part of the ceilings, like how high could he possibly go, that's probably the answer. And you know, as you look through the round at teams that are going to want to address that position, you know, like I said, the Saints maybe. Then you get down to, again, Pittsburgh at 21. And at that point, you know, you could be looking at a situation where it's in the 20s. And that's where it gets interesting with teams like, you know, Cleveland or the Giants maybe trying to trade back in.
Graz, you just mentioned the New Orleans Saints and the Pittsburgh Steelers for both Jackson Dart and Shedeur Sanders. Is there a world where Jackson Dart could go ahead of Shedeur Sanders in this year's draft?
I don't think it's out of the question, but it's not something that, like, it's not something that I've heard, you know, solidly enough to say, oh, this is starting to look likely. But, yeah, I mean, teams are still evaluating. Quarterback evaluation is extremely subjective. If the team that likes Shedeur Sanders the best doesn't take him because they just feel like, let's say it's the Giants and they don't feel like he's worth the third pick, then, you know, if the Saints like Jackson Dart better, then, yeah, of course, there's absolutely a world where that could happen. I'm not sure that we're there yet, but yeah, that we're a month away from the draft. I think anything's still possible.
Graz, thank you as always. We do appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
There's Dan Graziano, ESPN NFL Insider. We got to pick up with that with Fortenbaugh. Joe Fortenbaugh is going to join us next because I've been saying this.
You have.
I feel like the bet on ESPN Bet is to bet Dart ahead of Shedeur. We got to get into that with Joe and see if that actually makes any sense. We'll do that next. We're on Sportsmanlike, presented by.
Chào cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Ngày hôm nay mình sẽ tiếp tục hướng dẫn các bạn làm vòng. Vòng hôm nay của mình sẽ có tiêu đề là đen tuyền. Mọi người, hôm nay vòng của mình sẽ có tiêu đề là đen nhám. Bây giờ mình bắt đầu làm nha. Đầu tiên là mình chọn màu trắng. Mọi người ở đây này.